And the very best oolongs from the Wuyi Mountains are teas to drink on your knees with your head off. Kim, this is tea to write poetry by. So that's what I think of it.
I'm dying to try it. I'm dying to try it, so I'll be over soon.
Yes, if we were here together, I'd be happy to share some of mine. But there's nobody this far away from Wuyi who has very much at a time, and that includes some of my importer friends.
Why do you think that is? Because it's now well known?
This is tea that, for one thing, comes from mountains, so it's slower to grow and it's harder to harvest, and there's not as much of it. That's one thing. There's never going to be a great amount of this tea. And then, too, we in the West are only beginning to discover it. And so the bulk of it is consumed by very willing and very happy tea drinkers right there in China.
Got it. Let's talk about the polyphenols and the oxidation process that's confused with fermentation. Talk a little bit about the oxidation process of tea.
Well, that's what happens when you manufacture the leaf. If you take that leaf off a bush, allow it to wilt just a little bit so that it becomes soft, and that way then you can work with it without snapping the leaf in two. Once it has softened, lost a little moisture in the sunshine by wilting, if you apply heat right then, Kim, your product is green tea. You can be drinking that dried leaf for lunch when it was still on the bush before breakfast time. However, if you don't apply heat at that initial stage, what you do is you allow that wilted leaf to be rolled and bruised and then oxidized, what we used to call ferment. So this fermented tea, which has been allowed to just stay in the air for an hour or so after it was rolled and bruised, that leaf begins to turn brown. That's what oxidation is. If at that point you fire it, you've made black tea.
I thought that was fascinating in your book.
Yes.
And it came from the same stuff of the black tea.
Isn't it amazing that you can take the same leaf off the same bush, and depending on how you process that leaf, you can make it into either white tea or green tea. They have something called yellow tea that we don't really know about. You could make it into oolong or black or even pu'er tea, which we're just beginning to discover about.
You like that tea, don't you?
I like all that tea. I confess I wrote these tea books out of great love.
I can tell. I can definitely tell. I'm now interested in tea on a whole different level after reading it.
No, you see, I think you and I are like most of our fellow Americans. That's why I called it the new tea lovers' treasury. We are those new tea lovers. We didn't grow up drinking teas from the Wuyi Mountains in China. We had never heard of the Wuyi Mountains in China. You see, we didn't know how much better great tea can be than the ordinary tea that our mothers served us. Well, now that Americans have begun to discover what a miracle of vegetation tea is, we have become the new tea lovers of the world. You know, tea is the most popular drink in the whole planet. Mankind consumes more tea than anything other than water.
More than coffee?
More than coffee.
Wow.
And yet, America has been left out all of this time. The secret was safe from us. We never caught on. Well, now we're beginning to catch on. When my first book on tea appeared in 1982, the entire U.S. tea market amounted to well under $500 million a year. And today, today, the U.S. sales of tea are about $10 billion a year. So you see, our tribe has increased.
What do you think happened with Robert Fortune regarding green tea? Why did the industry turn against him?
I'm not sure that Robert Fortune was the Scottish botanist that the English East India Company sent to China in the 1840s to slip inland, disguised as a Chinese. I don't have any idea how a Scotsman pulled this off, even in the 1840s, but he did. He went into the interior of China, and he came back out with a whole lot of tea plants and seeds for tea plants and equipment for manufacturing tea, and even some workers that he had persuaded to let him hire them and take them to India to work for him. He was the man who first discovered that green tea and black tea both come from the same plant. They previously thought these were entirely different sources, entirely different plants that produced the one and the other. Well, when Robert Fortune's employers back in England set about creating a colonial tea industry, they decided that they weren't going to make green tea. They just wanted to make black tea. That way they could have one simple industrial process, and they would have one product, and within a generation they had persuaded all the European tea drinkers that this was what tea was. So it was the same as America 20 years ago, when we'd never heard of green tea, much less white or oolong. So that's basically the effect that Robert Fortune achieved.
I guess the Chinese had it out for him. They had a price on his head, you said in the book.
Yes, that's right. And he was obviously not only a botanist of great ability, but he was obviously either a total fool or one of the bravest men of his day to be doing what he was doing. He barely escaped with his life, it would seem.
What happened to Arum Datta Barua? How do I pronounce it?
Oh, yes, Maniram Diwan. He is India's great tea martyr, and he would have been a contemporary of Robert Fortune. He may even have met Robert Fortune in Calcutta during that period of the 1840s, 1850s.
Why did they hang him?
Because he dared to enter the business that the white rulers of India had decided would be their ticket to wealth, and that was the tea industry. And Diwan had property and knew all about the area of Assam, and he set himself up in tea estates just the same way the English sahibs were doing. And those English didn't like it. And so, when the opportunity arose, I'm afraid, it's a very sad story, but the truth is that they just arranged for him to be tried on trumped-up charges and hanged. And the government confiscated his tea estates, and they were sold at auction for peanuts.
Wow.
The people who bought them were the very Englishmen who had arranged for these trumped-up charges to get him killed.
His family still plays a role in Assam tea today. How do they play a role today?
Well, there are a lot of Baruas. That's the family name, Barua. And there were probably dozens or hundreds of Baruas in the mid-19th century. Well, now there are probably thousands or tens of thousands of Baruas, and a lot of them own a lot of land in Assam and are major producers of tea. So the English have gone, but Maniram's family is still there, and they are doing what he set out to do. They are large players in the tea business.